because I knew where he lived. Everybody on the Lower East Side knew where Sun Ra lived. So I took it back to him and asked for my money back. And he told me very succinctly, and it was the shortest thing that he ever said to me in all the time that I knew him. He said, it's in there. Because I was saying, man, this what you playing, you know, this ain't what's on the record, you know, and he said very, 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 very succinctly, it's in there, right? Just open up your ears and listen, right? And sure enough, I mean, years later, I heard what he was talking about, because he was talking about some beautiful melodies and beautiful harmonies, different rhythms, yeah, but he hadn't really moved into his more modern avant-garde period in 1966. He hadn't really done that. You see, because by 1966, the world had changed. Everything had changed. He had moved from Chicago. He'd become Sun Ra, and he moved to Chicago. He moved from Chicago to New York. New York was the center of activity around freedom of expressions. Yeah, New York was the place where the second Reconstruction, right? The center of the second Reconstruction. We're going, whether you know it or not, we're in the third Reconstruction in America. The first Reconstruction happened after the Civil War. The second one was the Civil Rights Movement, and we're in the third one right now. Yeah. In that period of Reconstruction, this music that we call free music, avant-garde, modal music, was the music that had taken over. Yeah. And so even though he had played that in Chicago, when he came to New York, he had to change. Everything was changing. In the 1960s, everything was changing. And so his music was very, very, very different. So when I took the recording to him and said, can I get my money back? He said, it's in there. And like, you know, you just take that record home and you listen to it. And I listened to it for years. And, you know, when I started teaching the course at the New School in 2002, some of that same music that was on that recording is some of the music that I taught, yeah, to the students, which shows you, you know, how advanced it was, right? Music that he did in 1956 was advanced enough for people in 2002 to say, wow, this is some bad stuff. You understand? You know, because that's where he was. He was just way ahead of anybody else. He was just way ahead. You know, so the course, the Unsung Heroes, deals with people like John Gilmore, Pat Patrick, who was a foundational member of the band. John Gilmore, these are people he met in Chicago. They came through a very, very important teacher whose name is Captain Walter Diet, and a high school called DeSable High School, which created some of the greats in the music like Nat King Cole, Dinah Washington, Clifford Jordan, Ronnie Boykins. Some of the greatest names in the music came out of DeSable High School. Yeah, and so so when I teach the course, I go, you know, I deal with Sun Ra in Birmingham, then I go into Chicago, where he became Sun Ra. Then, you know, we talk about New York in the 1960s and that whole Reconstruction, second Reconstruction period that is around the music that is called avant-garde, the October Revolution of 1964 that Bill Dixon was involved with. Then we deal with the 1970s, which is where I enter the picture, because I didn't start playing with Sun Ra until 1975, actually. Although I met him in 1966, I was incapable of playing with him in 1966. It took me 10 more years to develop myself enough for him to hear me. And he actually heard me play with a band called the Melodic Quartet. And the only reason he heard me play with that band was because that band had two musicians who had worked with him. One who came from Chicago, Ronnie Boykins, and the other one, Roger Blank, who we met in New York, and another one, Charles Berkeen. And we played, by that time, he had moved from New York to Philadelphia. Sun Ra's journey went from Birmingham to Chicago to New York, then to Philadelphia, then back to Birmingham. He did a round trip, yeah, because space is the place, like that, you know. So he, so when I met him, it was the New York phase, but then when he heard me, it was in his Philadelphian phase. And he, when I first went to the band, I would go to Philadelphia to rehearse with him. He would pay for for my train ticket, and I would go and spend weekends with him learning his music, because that's what you had to do with Sun Ra, you know. His music wasn't like, you didn't have like a 2-hour rehearsal. You had 12 hours rehearsal and several days at a time, you know what I'm saying? Because you didn't just learn the music, you learned the philosophy, you learned who he was. Yeah, you know, and that's why, you know, when I taught the class, I said it's impossible to teach Sun Ra's music without teaching Sun Ra.